What is the strangest thing you've witnessed someone do in public? I was stopped at a red light and there was a lady in the car next to me. She was having really sporadic head movements. Not the head bob dancing type, but just kinda crazy. After like 10 to 15 seconds of this, her neck went limp and her head just hung forward. The light turned green and I hesitated a moment, wondering if she needed medical care, and was about to pull in front of her to check on her when her head abruptly jerked back up and she drove off without hesitation. Sounds like she was nodding out on opiates. I used to work night shift repairing broken down trains. One night I was called out to a train parked up on a siding in the next town. So I went to the job, made the repair and was sitting in the driver's seat chilling and smoking a cigarette before heading back. Alongside the siding, over a fence, was an industrial estate with a bunch of units. There was one apparently working, and a loading bay door open. I saw a security guy come out of the door and stand there looking out for a minute or so before he started dancing. The dancing grew into a full-on Michael Jackson style routine with moonwalks etc. No music, he maybe had headphones, just this guy dancing away on his own in the night. That was unusual, but sort of okay. But he then stopped dancing, lied down on the floor and started rolling sideways back and forth. Maybe 5 times left, 5 times right. Then he got up and went back in. I can see he got a bit carried away with the music on his headphones or in his head or whatever that led to the dance. But I don't know what the rolling about was for. He was on fire. Woman in an immaculate business suit chasing a chicken down the street. I saw a dude with a suitcase, completely naked, entering our train. His facial expressions were normal. He looked concerned and stared at his phone the entire time until I had to get out. Casual Fridays at the office is getting out of hand. I moved to a town which had a bit of a bad reputation. The first thing I saw when I was bringing boxes in was a man walking down the street with a bunch of plastic bags on fire. He was holding it like a lantern and was so casual about it despite flaming plastic dripping onto him. Actually like the town though, it's got character. I saw a woman on the GO train pull out an entire raw white onion from her purse, then proceed to eat it like an apple as if it were nothing. She was tearing up and didn't seem to be enjoying it much. I wrestled in high school and was down about £20 for a tournament. We were walking back to the hotel after weigh-ins and my pants kept falling down, as I forgot a belt. One of my buddies' dads asked me if I needed a belt, and I said sure do, thinking it was a joke, or maybe he had an extra one in the hotel. He proceeds to take off his belt, give it to me, pulls a second belt out of his front pocket, and puts it on. No idea why he had 2 identical leather belts with him that day, but I appreciated it. 2 identical leather belts. Why the hell didn't he just give you the one from his pocket? He was being a gentleman. His pocket belt wasn't warmed. I was in a bathroom stall the other day when a little boy, maybe 6 to 7 years old, goes in the stall beside me. He sits on the toilet and starts humming some made-up tune. That was already a little funny but nothing uncommon. Then he starts aggressively humming louder and louder. It gets to the point where it's almost just shrieking, and then he suddenly stops because he's out of breath. 2 seconds later I hear a plop in the toilet and he then begins singing Hallelujah, Hallelujah, I just pooped in the toilet, and repeats this a few times. I was almost passing out from trying to hide my laughter. Once saw a man standing next to an extremely expensive looking home jump headfirst into a hedge, pull himself out, look at the hedge, and jump back in headfirst. He continued to do this for a while until someone nearby asked him if he were okay, to which he responded with "Don't worry, this is my hedge, I'm just bored." Still to this day I respect his casual not giving a vibe. Standing in line in a store at the mall when I hear a weird sound from a woman's large tote bag, that is also slightly moving. Could swear I heard a quack. Couldn't be though, except it was. She saw me looking at her bag confused, so opened it and showed me that she had half a dozen ducklings in there. She said she had errands to run and couldn't leave them in the car because of the heat. Made sense. But I think carrying around half a dozen baby ducks in a bag is pretty strange. Once saw a man unicycling through a mall parking lot with groceries bags in each hand. During a snowstorm. No one ever believes me. They don't believe me when I first tell them and assume I said bicycle. They really don't believe me when I correct them and say no, unicycle. One wheel. I wouldn't have bothered telling you this if there had been two wheels. There was a man running down the sidewalk who stopped when he got close and yelled strange fruit. And then farted into traffic, somehow not getting hit. He ran off down the street yelling about strange fruit. How does one fart into traffic? I'm genuinely curious. Dart. My bad. I like your first version. Right in front of my house, a couple of guys stopped their car, left it in the middle of the street, and began a fistfight. Then after a couple of minutes of each of them throwing more or less ineffectual punches, they both stopped and got back in the car and drove away. It's that last part that makes it so strange. If an argument had proceeded to blows, then I wouldn't just get back in the car with the other guy as if nothing ever happened. I watched a woman walk into Chipotle, wash her hands for a solid 5 minutes under the Sprite in the soda fountain, and then fill up a trash bag fully with the Sprite and walk out with it. If I was working there, I'd have just stood there and watched, because there's no way I'm interfering with whatever is going on. An old dude put down his suitcase and started doing a weird interpretive dance. The worst part is that this was in a crowd of hundreds of people and he was staring me down specifically with a creepy smile. I was a couple 100 feet away and when I looked back there he was smiling, dancing, eyes locked onto me. Once went on a drunken walk alone. At one point while walking though a part of my suburb I heard a hello shouted from across the street. I look over and see what appears to be a man who is also walking around drunk. Well, he must have been even worse than me, because he proceeded to hug a nearby telephone pole and slowly slide down it until he was laying on the ground, still holding the pole. I was going to the shopping center in a big city school trip to see some movie, and in one village we have been passing through I saw someone trying to cut off a street lamp with a saw, a hand saw. Also, I live in Poland so we joked that he wanted an outdoor lamp but didn't want to buy one. I was riding the Paris metro one day, when this middle-aged man sits down about half a car down, and is non-stop streaming the most foul, vulgar curses in French at no one in particular. Then suddenly, he hiccups, puts his hand to his mouth and says "Oh, excusez-moi," and, after a second, resumes his tirade. I had to turn around and hold my mouth to keep from laughing out loud. There's a guy who just moved to our small town who walks around shouting violent threats all day. His favorite is "I'ma kill you." He was in the middle of a tirade when someone greeted him. "Hey Joe, how's it going?" And in the most polite, meek little voice he goes, "Oh, I'm good, thanks." Then he walked on and continued yelling about murder. I was driving home from the grocery store and saw two guys standing at a bus stop. One had all his clothes off on the sidewalk while shaving his body. The other looked very uncomfortable. I don't think anyone believes me. Openly weeping while carrying a bagpipe while walking the streets of San Jose, California. I saw a man midday on a crowded place piss on a church. He just pulled his pants down and did it. I've worked downtown for 20 years, and have seen some shit, but two things come to mind. One, a guy riding a unicycle down a busy city street, all while wearing a propeller beanie and juggling. I figured he must have been practicing a routine, or something. Still, the sheer randomness of it made my day. Two, a white-haired old man wearing a sparkly sequin jacket, fiddling with this massive, ancient silver boombox. The boombox started playing some funky disco music, and the dude hoisted the boombox up on his shoulder and just started strutting down the street in time with the beat. Had his own theme music. I once watched a man at a restaurant place a bocce ball on his booth and sit directly on top of it. He shifted and lifted his ass cheeks to settle it deep in there. When he stood up, the ball was stuck almost all the way up his ass. He bent over, pulled on his shorts and did a little wiggle, and the ball fell out of his ass and made a thunk on the floor. A lot of people were watching. He picked the ball up and just said, "Sciatica," then walked out. Very strange. On a high school field trip we went to DC and a man was staring at the school bus while jerking off. It's always nice to visit your congressional representative when you're in DC. I was drunk in Benidorm and walked past a middle-aged bloke brushing a leak with a comb. He seemed so content. There were semi-nude women dancing in the windows next to him. He just cared about tending to his leak. A woman lift her skirt, squat and pee on the sidewalk in front of a bus stop. Middle of the day, high-end shopping center, busy intersection. Caught a guy jerking it in a bookstore. We saw a guy take a big crap right on the beach. Lifeguards were screaming at him and the local police took him away. At Bonnaroo I saw a guy with his pants down, dick out, jerking off and staring at Paul McCartney's end-of-show fireworks. Then he was showing his dick to some girls and a guy came up and punched him in the back of head, where he then started to hump the ground for a few seconds, then remain motionless, then hump the ground again. Security came and picked him up then. That was wild to watch. I brought my kids to the ocean long drive but we started early and as the kids enjoyed the ocean for the first time a middle-aged woman wearing a uniform of some kind walked by carrying a large about the size of a small suitcase cardboard box. She stopped and stared at my kids. It was odd so I said, "Excuse me, ma'am," and she wheeled on me and started shouting in some foreign language. I had no idea what she was saying but she sounded pissed. She was literally spitting as she yelled at me. My kids noticed and ran back onto the beach. Then she shook this big box at me and there was a dull thud as whatever was inside banged around. I dashed around her, grabbed my kids by their hands and jogged away from her. I looked back and she was still standing there. This was at a state park so there were no houses anywhere near there. Weird. I feel like I'm trying out for a part that Brad Pitt already got. But what was in the box? When I lived in Fresno, CA, I lived next to a liquor store that tweakers sometimes hung out at, outside the occasional meth head talking to imaginary friends. There was one guy that would walk around the parking lot collecting rocks. The best part was when he saw my Samoan friend and put his fist up and shouted Black Power. He was white. When I lived in Fresno, CA, that's all you need to say. First let me say I think this is strange in an awesome way, not a bad way. There's a man in the city where I live. I don't know what he used to do for a living, but he got injured and is now on disability payments from the government for the rest of his life. He was so grateful to the country, the community, the people, who's taking care of him now that he can't work at his carrier that he went out and bought a bicycle and cleaning supplies. And now he cycles around singing merry songs and wishing everyone a lovely day while going from shop to shop asking if he'd be allowed to wash their windows as a thank you for his welfare checks. Super strange and super awesome. I've talked to him a few times and he'll be the first to state proudly that he is in fact strange. He just thinks we need more strange people in the world. Like, he'll see someone sitting on a bench just staring at the ground and he'll bicycle right up to them and ask if they're okay. Look up, my good friend. The sun is shining, the birds are singing, and it's a lovely day. He won't pry. He'll just point out some positives and wish you a lovely day before breaking into song as he pedals towards his next shop window. Years ago I used to work doors as a bouncer. Had one bloke walk up the road towards me well into his cups, one step sideways for every step forward. You know what I mean, spot the pub, spot me, and do the old straight arm march that every bloke does when they are trying to hide their intoxication level. Marches up to a hand's breadth away from me, stares over my shoulder at the door. Evening, sir, I say. No response. Not tonight, sir, I say. He finally looks at me, slurs something like, why not? I state the obvious. Ooh, he ain't happy with that. Goes on a full-minute tirade on how the world was against him, and that I was knocking him back cause he was Curry Seppos. As he's ranting, he's shrugging out of his clothes, and by the time he's done, he's stark bloody naked on one of the busiest streets in the city. He then holds a finger up like at one moment, kinda gesture, then projectile vomits on his clothes whilst trying to maintain eye contact with me. Finishes, looks back at me, gives me the sup upwards nod, then strolls down the street stark naked. I like how you describe a curry then say Seppos as if we knew what that meant but not curry. One time I was at the zoo near the rhino exhibit and an old lady went and stood leaning on the fence with outstretched arms Titanic asterisk style and started yodeling. I swear to God the rhino got up from laying down. Pranced not ran, pranced over. Did a circle, then ran back and laid down. She got off the fence and kept walking. Nobody believes me. I live in NYC, so that might be cheating, but there's a guy on the UES who cosplays as a baby in a pretty interesting way. He'll walk down Fifth Avenue in the 60s and 70s pulling a wagon with toys, and every few blocks he'll upturn the whole thing, throw a tantrum, toys everywhere, crying, fists pounding, etc. After a few minutes, he'll calmly put everything back in the wagon, and do it all over again. I saw a guy mowing the middle of a busy street, no grass, at noon. Reversal. The best place for us as teens on a limited budget was to visit buffet restaurants and stuff as much pizza in our faces as we could. Our favorite place took a long time to clear tables, so we would just move tables after we got seconds. This one time, we finished our first plates, went to the buffet and went straight to the second table. An older couple sat down by our first table while we were getting our seconds. We finished, and as we walked by our first table, I grabbed some food off my original plate, munched on it, and looked at the lady. She was frozen in mid-cringe, horrified. Her eyes were massive, her mouth was at an odd angle, and she just glared at me. It didn't strike me until after I left that she had no idea that was my plate and just assumed that I was a child monster living on the streets eating other people's slobbery leftovers. Working at a local grocery store, had a guy buy a wheel of brie and sit out front and eat all of it. Happened more than once too.